Good evening. Welcome to the November 4th, 2015 Planning and Zoning meeting. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, then a moment of silence. Could we please have roll call from left to right?
Anthony Sutton.
Mike Dolan. John Grant.
Jane Servine.
Edward Mead. Carl S. Moore.
Tom Nickel.
Tom Panzella.
Jim Quish.
I am Ben Genninger, also present David Sulkus, City Planner, Phyllis Leggett, Board Clerk. The first item on the agenda is public hearing closed by 12/9/2015, expires 2/12/16, 125 Old Gate Lane, Zone ID.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Raymond A. Macaluso. I'm the owner of Westcott Mapes Consulting Engineers and Surveyors located at 142 Temple Street in New Haven. I'd like to congratulate those that are re-elected last night and wish them the best of luck in their new term. I represent 125 Old Gate Lane for the petition of Launch Milford. And it's the old U.S. Motors factory on Old Gate Lane. I'd like to, for the record, the special permit sign was put up October 21st, 2015. I'd like to give this to Ms. Leggett for the file. Tonight I have from the franchise Rob Arnold, who may speak if I can't answer some of the questions, and also Bob Gebler, who is the owner for the petition here at launch of Milford. The department reviews were submitted and came back all positive to all the departments, which is in your file. And tonight, we're here for the special permit for launch of Milford. The site plan that you have in your packages show Old Gate Lane. This area here is the approximate square footage of 30,000 square feet that they want to take in this building. The property right now is on 18 acres. And the total square footage that is in the building is 342,779 square feet. The parking is probably going to be the issue tonight, and we're here to address that. The zoning itself, in the zoning table, everything complies as far as the requirements except for the parking. And the parking is going to be spoken by Launch to explain their facilities in other areas, and hopefully the board will approve the parking that we're requesting. The current existing parking is 518 spaces. We're proposing actually 561 spaces. We're adding 43 parking spaces to the existing property. So right now, the current parking is 518 spaces all the way around. UI has a number of spaces that are dedicated out of the 518 spaces. And there's also 55 Old Gate Lane that some time ago, 3 or 5 years ago, that they took an additional 60 spaces when they were going to put a temple in. That was going to be on a Saturday or Sunday when there was no activity in the building itself. So Launch of Milford right now is proposing to put in 145 spaces of their own. If you look at the existing site, what we're doing is this is all paved in the south corner of the building. We're adding parking spaces in the back, striping. We're not adding any asphalt or anything. In the front, where you have Hacienda Storage, Fitness Edge, there's a couple of loading docks. We're taking out loading docks and we're putting in, filling in the loading dock to put in a green space area. So we're not adding any more impervious. Matter of fact, we're taking 539 square feet and decreasing the impervious and putting green space in. We're putting new parking spaces here in the front and again in the back. So the question is, how are people going to get from here to here? This area is going to be for employee parking only. The owner of the building has agreed that these employees will come in through the back entrance, which is over in this area. So anybody that parks here will be all employee parking, then you have other parking for these other other tenants right here, Clark and everybody else. So there's enough space throughout the whole complex to accommodate the additional 145 spaces, and as I said, we're adding additional spaces. The hours of operation, again, will be presented by Mr. Arnold from Launch. He'll explain the hours, how many people drive. It's not kids that drive, it's the parents that drop them off. And we're looking, again, to respectfully approve it tonight, if we could. And I think, again, the question is the parking. All the departments have approved it, and there's not too much more that I could say, except for hopefully I appreciate the board approving it based on what we're presenting on the parking. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, or should I let Mr. Arnold speak?
Let's finish the presentation, and if we have questions, we'll ask. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Arnold? I would like to pass out the information that Mr. Arnold is going to talk to you about on the parking for the board.
So the chart that you guys see in front of you there.
For the record, could you please state your name?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Robert Arnold, CEO and partner of Launch Franchising, LLC. So what you are all looking at there is a chart that we had put together based on data that we've collected from 5 existing locations. As of right now, we have 6 open locations from Nashua, New Hampshire, all the way down to Newark, Delaware. We did not have data from the Nashua, New Hampshire site, so as you can see, the bottom line there on that chart says no data. Generally, when we come into a new city, the parking issue does arise often. And the reason we put this chart together was to demonstrate to you and show you a couple different ways on how we come up with our actual parking necessities. Now, looking at the chart here, we came up with a couple different ratios. You can see max jumpers as a column and then max occupants, including employees. Now, we are a trampoline park. It's a family entertainment center. And what we mean by max jumpers there, we let in a certain number of jumpers into the facility at one time. We have a Center Edge is the name of our software. It's a point-of-sale system that will not allow us to sell tickets beyond the allowed capacity. And the capacity of the trampoline area is determined by, there's an ASTM committee for our industry that says, hey, you can only have so many jumpers per square foot on platform space and trampoline space. So when we design a park, we are designing for the number of jumpers that we believe that market can bear. So you see the max jumpers on the left-hand column, and then the next column is the max occupants, including employees. The max occupants in the second column there are what we have counted in our facility at peak times. Now, each of these facilities that we've taken data points from, we have the Warwick location and the Hartford location. We have taken seven different times during peak season, just trying to get an idea of what the highest number of people are in the facility. And then at that same time, we were counting the number of parking spaces that were being used at the time. So looking at the column on the left, the max jumpers, and then looking at the max occupants, you can actually see what our parking per occupant ratio is and the parking per jumper ratio is. So when you go down to the bottom, you look at the average line, we've got 0.84 parking spaces per jumper and 0.30 parking spaces per occupant. The facility that we're proposing to build over in Milford here, on Old Gate Lane, should have a max capacity of 175 jumpers. So based on that 175, that is, and using the ratios that we've created from the data from our other locations, we're looking at 145 parking spaces for this location at peak times. The hours of operation. So the hours of operation, generally we are afternoons and weekends. We generally are not open. During the school year, we open around 3:30 in the afternoon, and we close at between 8 and 9 at night. In Milford here, we'll probably be closing at 8 p.m. during the week, Monday through Thursday. Sometimes on Fridays, we run a toddler time where we open from 10 a.m., and Friday nights we close at 10 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, Saturday we operate from 10 a.m. until 10 p.m., and Sunday from 10 a.m. till 7 p.m. So we're generally on opposite hours from other businesses that are neighboring hours.
Also, Mr. Chairman, the owner of the property mentioned that all the tenants are in favor of launch coming into their facility, and I don't believe there's anybody here from 125 Old Gate Lane that will oppose. I also want to show you a proposed facade. This is not what we're asking for tonight. This is going to be based on the signage that will be presented and permitted. In your contract documents, we didn't have the detail as what's shown here with the jumpers and the canopies. But this will then become, this is just for information only. Again, what you have in your package doesn't have all this. It will be permitted, an application for permit for signage will be presented, and it will meet all the criteria and standards.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Mr. Nichol.
Yeah, when do you anticipate the maximum amount of vehicles being at your location? considering Edge?
Generally, Saturdays during the winter time. Our peak season goes from the beginning of December until the end of March. Saturdays between noon and 5 p.m. are generally the busiest times during those months. And then school vacations, of course.
And I should have asked, any comments from staff?
No. You have my report. They submitted, a letter in response to my report, so I have no comments at this time.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? Ms. Servine?
I'm looking at that parking area that's to the north, I guess, of Hacienda. If I saw that correctly, there's a sign, I think, at the entrance to that parking area that says, for use by the fitness, what's that called again? What is it? There's a sign there that says for Edge parking.
I'm not sure, Ms. Savine. It's like going to the Post Mall. It's nothing's dedicated. We could check. I know the only right now the only portion of that facilities that's gated off is for Hacienda, where they pull in with their vehicles and unload and load. I was not aware that there's a sign specifically for that. Oh, it was Mr. Kiley.
My name's Bob Kiley. I manage Hacienda Storage and do property management for the owner, Bob Fromm. And the sign that you're referring to is for overflow parking for Fitness Edge during their peak hours.
That's being counted as parking space for launch.
I didn't understand the question.
It's being accounted for, the parking for launch overall.
Right. It's not used that frequently by Fitness Edge.
Would you be willing to take it down?
Sure, by all means. No problem.
The landlord will take the sign down, so there's parking for all, and there won't be specific parking for any individual tenant.
Thank you. Just wanted clarity there.
Any additional comments? Seeing none, we'll open this up for public comment. Before I read the procedures, is anyone here to speak in favor or against this application? Seeing no one, we will bypass reading the procedure. Anyone see any reason why we can't keep the vote on this tonight? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Nichol.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve 125 Old Gate Lane as stated by Westcott and Mapes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you have to close the public hearing before you take a vote.
We'll close the public hearing. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion. I'd like to approve 125 Old Gate Lane as Westcott and Mapes indicated here for the special permit and site plan review.
Having a motion, do we have a second? Second. Having a motion and a second, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor? Anyone against? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to make sure they did that.
The next item on the agenda, if I could find the agenda, is proposed tax regulation amendment petition of Thomas P. Lynch.
You all set? Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Thomas Lynch. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Lynch, Trimbicki, and Boynton, and my office is located here in Milford at 63 Cherry Street. And I'm here tonight with my client, Daniel Shepro, who's the managing member of Beach Village LLC, the developer of the Beach Shore Village condominiums that's located at the end of Naugatuck Avenue at its intersection with East Broadway here in Milford. And we're actually before you tonight with two applications. It's an application to amend certain sections of the regulations pertaining to the CDD2 zone, and also per our zoning regulations accompanying such an application to amend the zoning regulations, we have a site plan for what we're proposing if the board sees fit to grant the application to amend the zoning regulations. So for sake of expediency, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make all of my comments in one presentation to you, and obviously voting upon the approval of amending the site plan and improving the redesign of this development would be contingent upon you approving the change to the zoning regulations, so we understand that. So this really involves a little bit of history of Milford. For those of us who have lived here in Milford, as I have for my whole life, this area has undergone a great deal of change. Back prior to the 1960s, the Walnut Beach area was a vibrant beach community. There was an amusement park down there. There were shops and residences that lined the shoreline. And in the early 1960s, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development underwent a series of takings, land takings, eminent domain takings along that area to develop an urban renewal project. And there's a large document, which I haven't made a copy of for each of you, but it's recorded in the Milford Land Records, basically setting forth the plan of development for this area. So what we're doing tonight is asking for an amendment to the zoning regulations to permit a change in the regulations so that the final 8 buildings in this complex can be developed to accommodate residential use instead of the original plan that had a mixture of commercial and residential use on the property. My client took over the property some 5 or 6 years ago. He originally had bought the property to develop it. He then sold it to another individual and held a mortgage on the property. He subsequently foreclosed on the mortgage and then undertook over the last 2 or 3 years the finalization of the development of this project. So what we have is a situation where Building A, which is located along Naugatuck Avenue, and Building D are the 2 areas left to be developed. The buildings currently, if you've been down to the property, you see that they're being built along the rear of the property on Monroe Street. Those are being constructed in accordance with the current plan for residential development of those buildings. But what we're before you tonight is to seek a change in the regulations to eliminate the 20% commercial use that's currently in the zone regulation, to allow these 2 last buildings to be developed in a residential use. And again, I'm speaking in terms of history. The handout that I just gave to you gives you a little bit of a flavor of what's going on over the years. The original development in the 60s provided for a mixture of development on the property and had land use restrictions that actually expired in 2008. So the original document that provided for certain ways to develop this property had restrictions that expired in 2008. So we are free to come before you now to seek a change in the zoning regulations providing for this percentage of mixed use. Another thing that happened is, we all know, the town in 2012 undertook a revision of the plan of development. We hired an outside consultant to come in and sort of give us little bit of feedback and some guidance on the development of this area. And on the bottom of pages 1 and 2 of the handout that I just gave to you speaks about how the current uses along Naugatuck Avenue are marginal, the majority being conventional commercial small office uses or automotive-related uses. There's currently no consistency in design along Naugatuck Avenue. Development nodes of clustered commercial uses incorporating streetscape design elements would serve to unify the corridor. Such commercial nodes should be encouraged at key locations along the corridor, while infill residential development should also be encouraged as unused and underutilized sites are redeveloped and or reconfigured. Based upon the type of commercial uses in existence and the number of vacancies along Naugatuck Avenue, reduction of commercial square footage at marginal locations would be in keeping with the market demand. And it's interesting that this consultant's report came after the financial collapse in 2008 and 2009, and the practical effect of what we've seen in that area is that commercial development really has not taken hold. There's a great deal of vacant space down in the lower Naugatuck Avenue area, and my client is before you tonight because he really wants to finish the development of this project, and because of current market conditions, residential use would be more appropriate and will speed and aid in the finalization of the development of the property. So we're talking about buildings A and D, and with me tonight as well are my colleagues Ray Oliver and Ron Wasmer, who have appeared before you many times. And Ray will speak about the redesign of buildings A and D, the reconfiguration of the floor plans, and Ron will go through the elements of the site plan with you. But as I said at the outset, the first step is really to ask for a change in the regulation to provide that these last two buildings be developed in a residential form. The current regulation states a specific number, and it's interesting. In some of our other corridor districts, or in the MCDD, for example, when speaking of mixed-use development, it doesn't set a certain percentage or a certain amount of square footage that should be devoted to the residential use and to the commercial use. So I'd like to say that this zone really creates an anomaly where there is a set percentage, and the way that I propose the language change to you leaves the flexibility to this board to take each project as it's presented to you on a case-by-case basis and use common sense and also utilize consideration of the particular area where a project is located to approve a project based upon the mix that's proposed in the application. We currently have approval for some 109,000 square feet of space in this development. There's 8 units along Naugatuck Avenue that have previously been developed and built for commercial use. But quite honestly, it's very impractical to sell these units. I akin it to my office complex that I'm in over here on Cherry Street, Harmony Place. That's a mixed-use development as well. And banks just don't give mortgages on commercial condominium units. They don't meet Fannie Mae standards, and it's very difficult for buyers to get mortgages to buy commercial units. I think the Milford Bank is probably the only lender that I know of in the area that affords mortgages or takes applications for mortgages for the purchase of commercial units. So it really is an impractical form of ownership in terms of a commercial condominium. So that is, again, another aspect of this request to you. Lastly, in terms of the building on East Broadway, that's building D, and there's proposed 4 residential units now in that building. And that request comes from a very practical reality that occurred after Sandy and Irene. The FEMA regulations and the flood elevations for this particular area were changed after the storms, and The original plan that called for commercial units on the first floor of the current approved buildings, commercial units on the first floor and then residential on the second floor. Now, because of the change in the FEMA regulations, the elevation required here is for ground level to be at a height of 12 feet. So it's impractical and virtually impossible to build a space that would accommodate a commercial unit. But as Ray will get into in a second, the way he's reworked these plans, it calls for 4 residential units, as we've commonly seen along the shoreline, with the with the building raised with the garage underneath and the first floor level of living space meeting the current FEMA standards. So those are the 2 buildings that are left to be developed that we wish to make the changes, and we like to think that those are practical arguments asking for the board to make the changes to the regulations so that we can do that. The application includes the actual language that I met with David. We drafted the language, or I drafted the language with his oversight and approval and presenting it to you as it stands tonight. So I think it does address the fact that it leaves this board with the flexibility to approve applications on a case-by-case basis. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ray. He's going to go over the change in the buildings with you, and then Ron will get into the elements of the site plan. And obviously, when we're all done, any questions, we can answer them. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Ray Oliver, architect with offices at 3 Lafayette Street, Milford. I'm here representing the Beach Shore developer. As I think Tom did a very, very good job in explaining what the present and the proposed configurations are. There are 2 buildings, Building A and Building D, that there are 2 sites that are not yet developed. The original Building A was to be a 5-unit commercial building, which now we're proposing to be a 4-unit residential building. Building D on East Broadway was a building that was to be a 4-unit commercial condominium building, and now will be a residential building. The main difference with the buildings basically, the building is the same bulk and size that the original building was, and it's 4 units. There are 4 units that are, instead of being 20 feet wide, are now 24 feet wide, for the reason that the developer would like to install residential elevators in each of these units. The demographics have changed somewhat. The kind of people that are wanting to buy these units near the beach have changed from the beginning. So the building D, say on East Broadway, basically has a garage and a storage unit that's on the first floor. As Attorney Lynch mentioned, these garages and storage areas have to have the flow-through construction that meets the FEMA regulations. From the first floor, you would be able to go upstairs or take an elevator up to the main living level that's on basically the second floor, and then bedrooms on the 3rd floor of the building. The buildings will be, the difference in the architecture of the building is slight. The roof style has changed from a straight gable to a gambrel style roof to give a little bit more living area to the bedroom area, and then the side along the street will have some balconies at the main living level to overlook the beach and the street on Naugatuck. The buildings will be done in the same character as the complex is being done with a variety of colors, a variety of roof colors as well, so that there's a nice mix in the variety of the building and the style of the building. All the remaining part of the architecture, the windows will be small scale, multi-paned. There'll be roof dormers to break up the mass of the buildings and give a pretty interesting look to the complex. Building A along Naugatuck Avenue is basically the same. We don't have to meet the FEMA regulation there, but the main layout is the same with a garage and storage area, upstairs the main living level. This building is somewhat shorter than the original building in length because that was a 5-unit building, as I stated earlier. Now it's a 4-unit building. Each of the units is slightly wider than the previous unit. So that's pretty much the story.
Good evening. For the record, Ronald Wasmer, professional engineer, licensed land surveyor with an office at 158 Research Drive, Milford, Connecticut. I'm going to be pretty brief tonight. The infrastructure of this site is all completely built. All the roads are built, all the utilities are built. Basically, there's 2 building pads that need to be considered, and the use discussed by Tom and the architecture discussed by Ray. Point out a couple facts of the site plan. The residential buildings result in a small decrease in the impervious cover and a small increase in the open space. These residential buildings provide additional on-site parking through the use of the garages. We've already touched base on the fact that these will be built in accordance with the current FEMA regulations, and these plans have been reviewed and approved by all the required commissions and departments. I'll just really briefly flip through the pages just of what we've submitted. Here we have a site plan. We've indicated with some color as to the 2 buildings that were the topic of discussion tonight, and the majority of the buildings that are built now. There's 1 building that's under construction and almost probably 95% complete. We've submitted an updated landscaping plan for specifically in the areas of buildings A and D. Some grading plans strictly just for construction purposes to demonstrate that we conform to FEMA's requirements. A utility plan more or less just shows that all the utilities are built, and an existing condition survey. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just in conclusion, a couple more comments. I got to be honest with you. I live on the other end of town, and I hadn't been down to this site until Dan first contacted me to help him with this application, and I met with him on the site with Walt Nichols, his real estate agent, and it's just incredible what's going on down in Walnut Beach. The development of the commercial spaces across the street, this development bringing residents into the area. There's a whole new vitality down there, and I think that adding the residents to the area will only help the other commercial units or the other commercial owners in the area. The Building D with the parking underneath will actually help the condominium complex because it will remove some parking from the actual parking lot and put the parking underneath those units. And then lastly, another point that I want to make is that, and I don't know if the board is aware of this, but under the original approval for each unit that is built and sold in this complex, my client actually makes a donation of some $10,000 to a fund that helps with the improvement of the facades in that area. It's part of the original approval, so that this is really something overall that has helped the area, and I think that the board, working in concert with him to try to finish off the development of the project, is not just good for him, but it's good for everyone in the area. So I'd ask that you approve the application, first to amend the regulation and then the changes to the site plan. And I know that the members of the condominium association are approval of this. Once you ask for public input, Mr. Chairman, I think the president of the association is here with a petition to present, so I'll leave that to him to present that to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from staff?
You have my report. No, I have no further comments.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Mr. Grant.
Actually, it's not a question. I have more of a concern. The way the regulation is worded affects the entire CCD2 zone.
Correct.
I understand the problems with this particular site and the need for it to have some special consideration. However, the regulation affects the entire zone. There are other properties that are meeting the requirements. Trolley Hill, for one, meets the requirements of this. If we change this, that gives them the opportunity to change all to residential. The school down there, Gabriel School, has got 9.2 acres. They're talking about the possibility of selling it. If we eliminate this regulation as far as having the 20% and the 80%, it leaves that open for interpretation as to do what they want to do with it. The whole idea of a CCD2 zone is to develop residential and office spaces within the area of the residential so that you have a mixed neighborhood. And I understand, again, like I said, that this particular site has some special considerations to it, but the changing of the regulation affects the entire zone, and it opens this board up into problems that I can see down the road where if somebody comes in and wants to develop a site and they say they want to do 10% of residential, somebody on the board says, oh no, I want 15, somebody else says I want 30, this board basically is going to have a hard time coming up with an open, somebody coming in and saying this is what we want to do to try to make that decision, and then to try to make that decision on each individual case basis. I really think we need to keep a defined percentages in there. What I would like to see, and I don't know, I'm sure if it's possible or not, but I would actually like to see maybe a zone change for this particular piece of property rather than changing the regulation for the entire zone or site area. That would be something up to Mr. Sulkus to answer if we could do that or not. So that's my take on this at this particular point in time.
Well, my response to you is I think that's the beauty of the change that I presented to you. In other words, it doesn't tie your hands. It leaves the board able to look at each application as it comes before and not pigeonhole 20% has to be this, 80% has to be that, or if the regulations stated another percentage. By changing it to what it is, what I'm proposing to you, leaves the board to have the discretion to look at each application as it presents itself. And there's very different areas along that whole stretch coming down from the intersection of Bridgeport Avenue and Naugatuck all the way to the shoreline. And there may be other spaces or other properties along that stretch where a larger percentage of commercial would be more appropriate. So that, in other words, this allows you the flexibility to review each application on its own merits. Yes, it does work in this particular case to my client's benefit because he only has 6% dedicated at this point, 8 units out of 49 dedicated to a commercial use. But I'm just saying, John, the flip side to your argument is I think that any regulation that gives flexibility to the board is a good regulation. But it's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's my problem with the flexibility. I can see, different things, and somebody come in and say, well, the board allowed this person to do this, and the board didn't allow me to do this, and and then the different thoughts that are on the board to come up with a procedure. Like I said, I much rather see maybe a zone change to move the zone lines to include this property into the residential side of it, so they can do what they want to do.
And just to pursue the argument one more step, theoretically, there's certain zoning regulations that are good to be standardized. Parking, setbacks, lot coverage, things of that nature. This is, whether this complex is built out or not, all we're talking about here is the use within. So my only response to that is I think there's certain zoning regulations where uniformity is a great thing, but this is something that does give the board flexibility to consider basically a use within a complex in the CDD2 zone. And the regulation as it stands right now contemplates a mix of the use. That's why you have 20% and 80%. But I'm just saying, by changing it as I'm proposing it to you, it allows you to have the flexibility to look at each application case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? Mr. Grant?
Mr. Salkis, is a zone change a feasible suggestion?
In my opinion, that would be difficult in that if you're talking about changing it to a residential zone, you still have commercial that's on this property, so you would automatically make that commercial pre-existing non-conforming. When you talk about residential, we're looking at basically single-family residential zones that I think are abutting this zone. This complex wouldn't fall into that category. We would have to create basically a spot zone that would be able to describe what's going on in this zone. And again, it wouldn't be a straight residential zone. It would have to be something that would have to take into account the commercial that's there. Keep in mind, I hear your concern about the percentages, but we have other zones in the city that have no percentages, and when an application is presented to you, you can either go along with the proposal that the developer makes at the time, or in some instances, I remember the last one we had was on West Main Street, and I remember Mr. Quish had a concern about the mixture of what was in there in terms of the percentages that the developer presented. In the end, the board chose to go with what the developer presented. This particular proposal would be handled the same way.
Another question. This zone does allow for special permit for 830G type usage. Would that be an option for them to go for a special permit for this particular piece of property to do what they want to do with the residential?
Well, keep in mind that under Connecticut General Statute 8-30G, 30% of the residential units have to be affordable. I don't know in the case of this particular project whether or not the creation of the 8 units that they're talking about would constitute the full 30% that you would need. And then you have to talk about, the 30% you're supposed to provide units that are equivalent to other units. So if they're building, say, 2 buildings that they're all 830G, the question is now, are you segregating those units because they're not mixed in with the rest of the complex, and are they equivalent units to what's there?
Mr. Sulkus, do you think this application is the most effective solution to the issue?
From the applicant's perspective, it is. You know, in terms of the rest of the zone, there are few properties that right now exist that trigger the 2-acre minimum, because this particular regulation is for lots that are 2 acres or above. You have this one, you have St. Gabriel's, there may be 1 or 2 other properties. So the effect of this is limited unless other properties are somehow consolidated to get that minimum acreage that you need. You know, it's in the end, it's really your call. If you think that this particular change is not advantageous to the rest of the zone, then don't approve it. If you think there is some other tweak that you would like to make, a modification to the regulation, I mean, I think people would want to hear that, including the applicant.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Grant.
Just on the in a little bit of research that I was able to do in the time frame that I knew about this, there's 5 properties that fall into this particular zone, category that are there right now. There's only one other piece of property that fits within this regulation that is meeting the 80 and 20%, and that's Trolley Hill, which is right up the road from them. The other 3 properties are other uses, but have the potential to go to be used for this particular, under this particular regulation.
Can I add to that, Mr. Grant, that Trolley Hill was developed, I believe, in the early 1980s, and it was before the CDD2 zone regulations were put into effect. So whatever was done then, it was probably done on an RMF 16 or an RMF 9 development, or some form of a mixed use, but the CDD2 zone regulations weren't in effect at that time.
It might not have been in effect, but they fall under it at this particular point in time. That's what I'm just stating.
Mr. Quish.
So I think the underlying feeling is that we understand that vacant commercial space exists and it doesn't make good sense to build more. And so I think another underlying question is this really the only way to get done? I don't know that. I don't know that if there is another solution. I'm not a land use attorney, so I don't know. I mean, is there potentially another way to do it that would then eliminate Mr. Grant's concerns?
Not that I can propose to you. And again, these are condominiums, so remember, we're not building up rentals. These are for sale condominiums, and I go back to the point that I made earlier about the practical problem. Banks just don't give mortgages on these units, unfortunately.
There's probably another way with a modification that would change to the language that would, in effect, just affect this property. If the language is modified to keep the current language as the applicant has proposed, and you put in, say, for properties that are within, 1,000 feet of, the shoreline, or properties that are have a flood zone going through them, you could limit the impact on the rest of the zone, because in effect you would be creating a regulation that would just apply to this property, and you wouldn't be creating a spot zone.
Any further questions? Ms. Servine?
So you just gave another possibility, and the other would be to change this to make it a non-conforming property, which is not in your best interest, of course.
Well, that was our original application. If you remember, a couple months ago, we came before you with the original application to amend the special permit and site plan, and David's memo to you said that, in his opinion, that would create a non-conforming situation, and I'll let David speak for himself, but his recommendation was not to go forward with that and to go forward with this application.
Oh, just to spell that out, what's the disadvantage, and I may know this, but I may not know all of it, what's the disadvantage of creating non-conforming here?
Well, your regulations talk about not creating nonconformities, so.
Well, I was going to make the waiver pitch. In other words, waive the 20% requirement. I mean, that was going to be our initial presentation to you.
One more thing, wouldn't we then
David,
have
you want to tell us, Gene, what you said that you would do if we went forward with that application?
Was that?
Let's just say he didn't encourage me to go forward with that application.
This then, in fact, the term mixed residential use wouldn't be appropriate any longer for this particular section, so we just forget about that, the
No,
mixed
because
use.
we still have a commercial use here. We still have 8 commercial units here. Right, so it still is a mixed use. It's just 94 and 6 and not 20 and 80.
Are the applicant and the city attorney prepared to go forward with language that would amend it and make it less restrictive today, or would it make better sense to come back next meeting with that language?
I can work with the applicant to modify the language, and if you keep the public hearing open and bring a modified language in, if that's the way that you'd like to go. So the you'd have a change to the CD2 regulation, but in effect, it would just apply to properties that are, say, have the flood zone going through them, or within 1,000 feet of the water. Whatever it is, we'll come up with some sort of language.
Would that create a problem with your notice? This has been noticed with the regulation. It's been posted in the town clerk's office with the regulation as proposed.
The board can modify. I mean, you as the applicant are coming in with a proposal.
I'm just throwing that out to you.
Yeah,
That's your call.
Yeah, I mean, the board can modify your regulation, your proposal. It could deny your proposal. It could approve your proposal.
Okay.
So if you're amenable to a modification, then the public hearing is still open, and the public can comment on it on the new language when it's brought in.
We'd be agreeable to that.
Mr. Quish?
What would prevent us from amending the language now, and after the public hearing, we could just vote on it?
I was just concerned if we say within 1,000 feet and they're at 1,005 feet from the shoreline, or it includes 3 different buildings that we didn't intend. But if we're comfortable with language, I'm fine with doing it tonight.
If you want to work on language tonight, I would suggest maybe a short recess. I'd like to get together with the engineer for the site, and because I would be leaning toward language that would talk about the flood zone, because that's the issue that really prompted this, the flood zone going through the property.
Right, and we have the survey that shows the distance for that.
So if we come up with language that's related to the flood zone, I think that's probably the best way to do it, because we know it's on the site, and we know that's the reason, one of the reasons why they've come before us.
So if you're comfortable with maybe a 5-minute recess and coming up with language, then I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure we could make an amendment that makes sense and not find out tomorrow that it didn't make sense. So why don't we take a 5-minute recess?
Okay.
We are back on the record. We left off, we were going to try to come up with some proposed language, and then we could have public comment, and then potentially have a vote tonight. Mr. Sulkus?
Okay, the language is the following. If you look at if any of you have your regulation books, the current language for 3.17.2.16 subsection 2, the language that's currently in the book would remain. Added to that language in that section would be the following. So there's one two-line paragraph there, so we would add the following to that. In the case of a property that is in an AE12 flood zone, the percentage of the total gross floor area devoted to residential use shall be determined by the board, period. The second part of the applicant's proposal, which is the amendment to section 3.17.2.16, subsection 4, would remain the same, because you would then, depending on what the board decides for point 2, that section point 4 would determine the balance of whatever's left. So everything works.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the board before we open this up for public comment?
I would just like to add that on behalf of the applicant, we are in agreement and approval and appreciate David's effort to resolve that issue. Thanks.
Thank you. So we will open this up for public comment. If you could please approach the podium, clearly state and spell your name, address all comments to the commission, and try to keep your comments under 3 minutes. If you're in favor of the application, please come forward.
My name is Bill Schule, S-C-H-U-L-E. I currently reside at 22 Schweike Beach Way in Milford, Connecticut. I am also the president of the Beach Shore Village Condo Association. Back in July, we had a petition, and I can read the petition. I don't know if you all have that comments. I have a brief petition here that we had all the residents then sign, the residents we could find. It was just basically the residents of Beach Shore Village urged the approval of the application to amend its site plan, so the mixed-use requirement is changed to the plan presented with the application. The reasons for this are many and vital to condominium and surrounding community. Parking inside the condominium will be under the units and not in the inside streets, which are often fully parked. There is no need for empty stores and offices here and across the street. Many stores have been vacant for years. The new flood regulations now require the building on Broadways to be above a certain level, making commercial use not practical. More residents mean more business for existing new commercial tenants and existing for-rent stores. And lenders are reluctant to loan where residential condominiums have mixed uses, and this affects the value of the owners and the taxes of Milford. The proposed plans are compatible to condominium units in the neighborhood. I have the originals here. If you want them, I can present them to you. As a resident, we're strongly in favor of this change. We're looking forward to completion of all these units to be built, hopefully within the next year. So thank you for your consideration, and thank you. You want these?
Thank you. Sure, you could bring those up. Anyone else in favor of the application? Seeing no one else, is anyone opposed to the application? Seeing no one, any last questions or comments from the board? Mr. Grant?
I just want to make it so clear. Still 2080 for the rest of the zone, right? Still 2080 for the rest of the zone, right?
Correct. Keep in mind that if there is if there's a property that's in the AE12 flood zone, then they would qualify as well.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we will close the public record. Would anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Grant.
I'll make a motion to approve the regulation change.
As amended by Mr. Sulkus.
Amended by Mr. Sulkus.
Having a motion, do we have a second? Mr. Quish seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Servine?
I'd just like to comment that this was a very interesting way of resolving this problem, and I think everybody's pleased about it, so thank you all.
Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion as amended? Anyone against? Motion passes. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public hearing close 11/24/15, expire 1/28/16, 1613 New Haven Avenue, Zone R-12.5. I'm sorry, before we do that, we have to pick a date for the regulation change to go into effect.
November 19th is 15 days, so make it the 20th. That's a Friday.
How about Friday, November 20th?
Okay.
To affect November 20th, 2015.
Mr. Chairman, can I just raise a procedural issue on item number 2? You approved the regulation change. I don't think you voted on the site plan approval.
If we have to do that formally, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the site plan approval? Mr. Quish.
I would move to approve as presented.
Mr. Grant with the second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone against? Motion passes. Thank you. We're back to 1613 New Haven Avenue. No, we're not. We're not.
I'm presenting that.
Fourth. The next item on the agenda, again, is 1613 New Haven Avenue.
Mr. Chairman, Thomas Lynch, attorney for the applicant on this matter. I believe we're in the process of trying to get an independent traffic consultant per the board's directive at the last meeting, so I don't think we have anything to report to you tonight, and I guess we'll hopefully be back to you on the 24th of November.
Thank you. I think the only thing we have to do, it's supposed to close by 11/24/215. Will you agree to an extension?
We do.
All right.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, just to let you know, we have it's either 4 or 5 RFPs out for that consultant. So we're hoping to hear something, by the end of the week.
Thank you. And Mr. Servino would like to make a reminder.
I think we were also asking for the landscape changing.
And we do have those, but we figured we would make one presentation to you if we could.
Very good. And the lighting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
John Wicko and Ron were both working on those, but we made a decision to just hold off, and we'd take care of that with the traffic.
So, Mr. Sulkus, we're okay with the extension?
How long are you going to grant us the extension for?
30 days.
We're going to start with 30 days.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is request for street name change from Swecky Beach Way to Beach Shore Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Thomas Lynch. I'm actually presenting on behalf of the Beach Shore Village Association this application. Very briefly, and the association president, Bill Schultz, is here. We've submitted a letter. I don't know if all the board members have it. I can read it into the record. Is the nod?
We have it. If you want to read into the record, you can.
I don't really need to read it into the record. I think it speaks for itself. Very briefly, the prior developer, the family name of the prior developer was Schwecke, and they're long gone. And in terms of aesthetics, I don't think a name is aesthetic. I'm trying to come up with a nicer way of saying that Beach Shore Drive is a nicer name than Schwecke Way, so that the members of the condominium association are making this request to you to change the name to Beach Shore Drive to match the name of their condominium association.
It's also easier to spell if you're unfamiliar with it.
And I know we're on public access TV, and I hope that Jonathan Schwecke isn't somewhere watching this, but sorry.
Any comments from staff?
I will tell you that they're going back to the original name. When this application originally came to the board, that was the name of the road, and it was originally approved that way. So this is actually very good.
And whatever steps need to be taken with the fire department, the normal steps, have the GPS and the emergency response changed, we'll take care of that.
Well, actually, we have to do, by law, we do that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can double the effort, but anytime we have an address change or a street name change, there's a whole standard list of authorities that we have to notify, including emergency 911, the post office, everybody. We provide them, the applicant with, a form letter for people who want to send things to, their banks. If someone's asking for, proof of a change, the city will provide that documentation.
It creates practical problems in terms of real estate closings because on an ongoing basis you're putting 95 Beach Shore Drive F, formerly known as Schwecke Way. It's a practical problem on the land records, but I'll leave it to the zoning office to do whatever is necessary to take care of the other departments.
So as you know, the majority of people currently on Schwecke Beach Way are in favor of this.
Absolutely.
If not everybody.
I can represent its unanimous approval.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, would anyone, Mr. Nichols?
Will there be a sign indicating that this is a road now? I mean, it says take a left off of Joy, but there's no sign.
There's no sign going in, Tom, I'm sure that whatever needs to be done to bring people's attention to the fact it's now Beach Shore Drive, they'll take care of. And the condominium association bill is here, so whatever steps are necessary for that, the management company will take care of it.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? Seeing none, would I like to make a motion? Ms. Servine?
Make a motion for approval?
Do we have a second? Mr. Sutton? All in favor? Anyone against? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
The next item on the agenda is liaison report. Anyone with a report? Mr. Mead? The next item on the agenda is regulation subcommittee. Mr. Grant?
Everybody has in front of them the latest suggestion from the board is to delete a particular regulation with no substitution. The reason for is originally the regulation was put into effect to correlate with the building code, which had a distance of 8 feet from a residential to any kind of outbuilding. And then it changed to 10 feet. And then with the current code, it basically allows for any distance for an accessory structure, say like a garage, a freestanding garage, to be within 6 inches of a building. But the one thing the building code does do now is it makes the requirements that anything within 5 feet has to have fire-rated construction, so that if a garage caught on fire, it would take an hour for the flames to get over to the house. So this regulation is being deleted out of our zoning regulations because the building code covers it and covers it in a much greater detail.
Thank you. And you're asking us to vote to get it to the next stage?
Yeah, we'd like to get a vote tonight to take it to the next level, which would be sending it out to all the different agencies.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Sutton with the motion. Anyone with a second? Ms. Servine, all in favor of the motion? Anyone against? The motion passes. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Did anyone read the minutes? Would anyone like to make a motion or comment on the minutes? I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Mr. Dolan seconds that. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is Chair's report. I have a quick report. I made a lot line adjustment and lot consolidation to 173-179 Orange Avenue. The next item on the agenda is the staff report. Any report from staff?
Not this evening.
Any new business? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.